The boy was crowning in the cold. Snow fell so thick the pines looked like ghosts. Her boots were soaked through, and the pain in her back had turned to tremors. She bit into the sleeve of her coat, crouched behind the hay sled, and forced her breath to stay quiet. Not from fear of beasts or men, but from the awful truth that she might give birth right there, in the white, in the middle of nowhere, with no roof overhead and no help in sight. Alma Treadwell had two choices: give up and die in the snow, or push through the agony and finish the shelter. There were still 6 more hay bales to stack. She had only one lantern left burning and her fingers barely functioned, but the warmth leaking from her body would kill the baby faster than the wind if she didn't hurry. She gritted her teeth and slammed the next bale upright, jamming it into the curve she'd started 3 days earlier. A crude dome of hay packed in snow, smoothed by frost, hollowed from the center like an upside-down nest. It wasn't a proper cabin. It wasn't even a proper idea, but it was the only one she had. They had told her, sneering mostly, that no woman alone could last the winter, that she was foolish for coming north without a man or a proper cabin or a plan. They weren't wrong about the danger. They just didn't know the whole story, because Alma hadn't come to the edge of the wilderness out of pride or stubbornness. She'd come because she was pregnant, alone, and out of places to run. Her husband had died in Missouri under circumstances no one wanted to question. Her brother-in-law had offered her lodging in return for favors she wouldn't name aloud, and the church women had gossiped about her before she'd even started to show. So she sold what little her husband left her, bought a mule, and rode north with everything she had on a sled: a lantern, some flour, salted pork, sewing needles, and 24 hay bales scavenged from an abandoned field. What she built with them was madness, but it was warm. The Hay-Igloo, she never called it that out loud, never named it anything, was dug into a drift behind a ridge where the wind couldn't scream through. She built it from the inside out, tunneling into the hay mound, compacting the walls with her fists, shaping a low arch ceiling so the heat would stay pressed against the roof. On the floor, she laid broken twine and hay dust in thick layers to insulate it from the frozen ground, then stacked bales in a circle until the wind outside sounded like distant surf. Inside, it smelled like animals and dry summer, like something remembered from childhood, but it was warm. She had just enough space to sit up, to boil water on a little tin stove, to hold her knees and cry quietly without the sound escaping. In daylight, she covered the entrance with an old bearskin. At night, she slept beside the tiny fire and prayed it wouldn't burn the place down. And now, in the middle of a blizzard, her child was coming too early. Her water had broken 2 nights ago. She'd waited, biting down on whatever panic she had left, timing the contractions with notches she carved into a stick. She had read once that the longer you could delay pushing, the better the outcome. But the snowstorm changed everything. The temperature had dropped 20 degrees in an hour. If the storm packed in too much snow around the vent hole she'd carved at the top of the dome, the fire would go out, and they'd both freeze. She pushed the last hay bale into place. Her breath hitched. She crawled back into the hole she'd made for a doorway, dragging herself down like a soldier retreating to a trench. Inside, the stove was still glowing faintly red. The walls steamed where her body heat met the hay, and then she screamed, not from pain, not entirely, but from something worse. The terror of doing this alone, of no one hearing, of the possibility that her child would come into the world with no one to catch him. But someone had heard, or something. Outside, just beyond the hay wall, there were boots, not approaching, not stomping, just standing. She stopped breathing. She had no weapons left, just the hay knife she used to cut flakes from the bales. She fumbled for it in the dark, one hand clutching her belly, the other patting the floor around the stove. The boots shifted, then silence, and then the sharpest crack, like a tree limb breaking under ice. Something heavy fell against the dome. Hay scattered, a breath, then another scream, this time hers, as the baby twisted inside her, urgent and unforgiving. She dropped the knife. There wasn't time to care who stood outside. She collapsed back on the hay bedding, spread her legs, and bore down with everything she had. The wind howled, the dome creaked, a muffled sound echoed outside. Maybe a voice, maybe just her mind unraveling. And then the child came. He slid out fast, slick and hot against her frozen thighs. She caught him with numb hands, lifted him, checked for breath. His eyes opened wide, no cry yet. His skin was blue. Her heart stopped. Then a shudder, a tiny inhale. Then his cry came, thin but alive, and Alma wept like she hadn't wept since burying her husband. She wrapped the boy in her coat, pressed him to her chest, and rocked forward, letting her back hit the cold dome wall as she choked out laughter and tears in equal measure. The boy had survived, so had she, for now. Then the bare skin at the entrance lifted. Alma froze. A woman's face appeared. Dark hair, wide jaw, cheeks cracked with windburn. Her eyes scanned the hay dome with confusion and awe. She looked behind her, then back at Alma. "You built this?" the stranger whispered. Alma couldn't answer. She just nodded, still cradling her son. "You're bleeding," the woman said, stepping in fast, careful to keep her boots off the bedding. She had a satchel. She pulled it open. "Lie back. Let me help." Alma didn't argue. She was too tired to question the miracle. The woman unpacked boiled cloths, sealed jars of salve, a flask of something stronger than water. Her hands worked quick and practiced. Not a settler, Alma thought. Not a church wife either. A midwife, or something close. "You alone out here?" the woman asked. Alma nodded again, eyes closing. What's his name?" "I don't know yet," the woman smiled, just faintly. "You'll know soon." Outside, the wind slammed the ridge like a battering ram. But inside the Hay-Igloo, the fire held, the walls steamed, and for the first time in weeks, Alma didn't feel alone. The silence after birth felt heavier than the storm outside. Alma drifted between awareness and exhaustion, her boy swaddled tight against her chest, both of them wrapped in the stillness that only came after pain had passed, but before the next kind of hardship began. She didn't remember closing her eyes, only waking to the sound of boiling water. The stranger had rekindled the fire and was heating something in a small metal pot on top of the stove. A bitter, herbal smell filled the air, sharp, pungent, not like the tea Alma had known, but something older, something made for healing more than taste. "I crushed dried yarrow into it," the woman said softly, without turning. "Helps with bleeding. You're cold under the skin. Your lips are pale. You'll drink this before you try to sleep again." Alma tried to sit up. Pain answered her in a full-body wave. The woman noticed and turned quickly. "No, don't push yourself. You delivered a child in a hay tunnel. That earns you the right to lie still." She brought the cup over, held it to Alma's lips. It tasted like roots and metal and wild grass. She drank. Then she whispered hoarse, "You didn't say your name." The stranger smiled, but the smile didn't reach her eyes. Didn't ask. Still, "Call me Rhea." Alma tried to nod, but her body ached too deep. "Where did you come from?" "Down from the pines. I was hunting snow rabbits when the wind shifted. Saw the tracks. Your sled half buried. Saw the dome. Didn't know what it was, not at first." "You live nearby?" "No." That word hung in the air longer than necessary. "Been walking for weeks. Took shelter a few valleys south. Old stone foundations someone left behind. Been watching the weather ever since. This one's no common storm." "I know," Alma murmured. "I felt it coming." Rhea touched her wrist. "A quick pulse check, maybe, or something else. You've got a strong heart. Weak woman wouldn't have survived this long. Not on hay and borrowed heat." Alma looked down at her boy. His breathing was steady. His skin no longer blue. He twitched slightly in his sleep, his tiny fingers curling under his chin. "He's strong too." "He'll have to be." For a while they didn't speak. Rhea cleaned up the afterbirth, packed the bloodied cloths into a canvas bag, and sealed them tight with pine resin. She moved with a quiet efficiency, as if she'd done this before, though her eyes never stayed still long, always glancing toward the hay-covered entrance, listening for things Alma couldn't hear. "You're running from something," Alma said, not as a question. Rhea froze, then resumed folding the cloth. "Aren't we all?" The storm didn't break for another 3 days. It got worse. Each night the wind rose higher, the snow grew thicker, and the outer layer of hay froze hard as bark. The vent hole Alma had built, just a crude narrow shaft leading up through the top of the dome, kept clogging with ice. At first Rhea dug it out with a carved stick, careful not to widen it too much. But on the third morning, the smoke stopped rising. The hay above it had iced over completely. No air was getting out. Inside the dome, the air grew thick and damp. Alma tasted soot when she breathed. The baby wheezed once, then again. "We can't keep the fire lit," Rhea said, crouching by the stove. "We'll poison ourselves. He'll freeze without it." Rhea looked up, jaw clenched. "Then we dig." It sounded simple. It wasn't. They didn't dare go through the top, not with the wind still raging. So they widened the inside tunnel, carving sideways, layer by layer, into the frozen hay, then into the snowbank surrounding the igloo. Rhea did most of it, pushing out the packed snow with her boots, breaking the frozen dirt with a chunk of iron she kept in her bag. Her breath came harder with every swing, but she said nothing. By dusk, they'd opened a second vent on the low side of the dome, shielded from the wind by the ridge. Smoke finally began to drift again, but that night, the howling changed. Alma woke to a sound she didn't understand at first. It wasn't wind. It was lower, more rhythmic, like something pacing. Rhea was already crouched crouched at the entrance, her rifle in hand. "Don't move," she whispered. Alma sat up carefully, baby in arms. "What is it?" "Wolf," Rhea said, voice tight. "Too close. Can't tell if it's alone." Alma's blood ran cold. The hay smelled like blood. The afterbirth, even packed away, would still draw animals. Even the dome itself, warm and hollow, would attract anything desperate for heat. Rhea cocked the rifle slowly, barely breathing. Then came the growl, deep and wet. It scraped through the wall like claws against bone. The dome trembled. "It's clawing at the snowpack," Rhea muttered. "It's trying to find the opening." Alma pulled the baby tighter. He whimpered just once. The growling stopped. Then the dome shook again, not from clawing, but from weight. The wolf had jumped on top. The ceiling groaned. Bits of snow fell. "Move to the tunnel," Rhea said. "Now. Crawl slow. Take him. I'll follow." Alma didn't argue. She slid toward the exit, cradling her child, praying the hay walls held. She could feel the heat leaving the dome the moment she got near the mouth of the tunnel, the wind outside biting like glass. Behind her, Rhea whispered a prayer she didn't recognize. Then came the shot. It cracked like thunder inside the dome. The baby screamed. Alma did too. Then silence. Outside, something thudded hard into the snow, rolled once, then went still. Rhea didn't move for a full minute. Then she crawled out behind Alma, face pale and jaw set. "It's dead," she said. "Young male, skinny, desperate. Are there more?" "Not tonight." They dragged the carcass away from the dome, buried it under snow 100 paces west. Rhea cleaned the rifle, still not speaking much. Alma fed the baby in silence. Later that night, Alma finally asked, "You said you'd been walking for weeks. Where from?" Rhea stared into the flame. "South of the Bitterroot. There was a camp, women mostly, children. Not official, not listed anywhere. Just people like you and me." "What happened?" "Flood hit. Then fire, then men." Alma said nothing. "I was away when they came," Rhea said. "When I got back, the river was full of ashes, so I walked." The silence between them wasn't empty. It was something heavier, like two survivors realizing they were the only ones left who understood. "I didn't come north to build a home," Alma said. "I just came to get away." "Well," Rhea said, finally smiling, "you built one anyway." For the first time since the baby came, Alma laughed. It wasn't long, it wasn't loud, but it was real. The storm finally passed on the 5th day. The snow stopped falling. The sky turned the pale blue of early thaw. Birds chirped like they didn't know what they'd missed. The dome had hardened. The outer hay crust sealed tight by days of snow and ice. It gleamed in the sun like glassy gold, steaming faintly where the heat still bled through the seams. It wasn't beautiful, but it was solid. No leaks, no cracks, still standing. And inside, the baby had his first long sleep without crying. Alma emerged into the light that morning, with him swaddled against her chest, and Rhea beside her. They stood on the ridge, looking down toward the tree line, where distant cabins smoked and a few horses moved slowly across the white. Life was returning. People might come up the trail again soon. "They'll ask questions," Rhea said. "They always do. They won't believe you built that. They never do." The baby sneezed. Alma chuckled, kissed his forehead. "Then let them wonder." The world had nearly ended for her, twice, and still, here she stood, with hay in her hair, blood on her boots, and the strongest thing she'd ever held, cradled in her arms. It was 3 days after the storm broke when Alma first saw the rider. She had just stepped outside the dome to check the sled, hoping to scavenge what little gear the snow hadn't buried. Her body still hurt in strange, deep places from the birth. Her legs were unsteady, but she moved anyway, boots crunching over a crusted layer of snow that squeaked with each step. The sky was cloudless and sharp, the kind that made you squint even though the cold still chewed at your ears. Rhea was inside with the baby, boiling pine needles for a kind of tea she insisted was good for nursing mothers. Alma didn't like the taste, but she drank it anyway. Anything that helped her milk come in was worth the trouble. She was halfway to the sled when she saw the shape on the ridge. Not a bird, not a bush. A man, mounted, watching. Alma didn't move. Her throat closed. He hadn't seen her yet. His horse was pawing the snow, steam rising from its sides. The rider sat slouched, the way tired men sit when they've been looking too long at nothing. But Alma knew the stance, knew the build. Not many rode alone this far north, unless they were scouting or hunting. She crouched, hands trembling, eyes never leaving the figure. Slowly she backed toward the dome. The hay had darkened since the freeze broke, the outer layers beginning to rot a little at the base, releasing a sweet, foul scent. But it still stood solid, and from a distance, it looked like nothing worth notice. She ducked into the tunnel and whispered, "Rhea." The woman looked up from the stove, face instantly alert. "What is it? Rider? Alone? On the ridge?" Rhea didn't ask where. She grabbed the rifle, moved to the vent shaft, and peered through the narrow slit she'd carved in the ice. After a moment she spoke. "He's moving slow, not army. Saddle's too low. No colors. Is he coming this way?" "No, but he's looking hard. Might be tracking." "Me," Alma whispered. Rhea didn't ask for details. Instead, she pulled her pack from the wall and began checking supplies. Powder, bullets, dried meat, clean bandages. Alma held her child tighter. "If he's come all this way, he'll come farther." Alma sank against the inner wall, the baby squirming against her chest. Her breath felt tight in her lungs. "I don't have a real name for him," she said. "I only ever heard folks call him Morgan." Rhea didn't look up. "Yours?" Alma shook her head. "My brother-in-law." She told the story quickly. The first few months after her husband's death, the whispered offers, the hard hands that didn't care about answers, the preacher who smiled when she asked for help but looked away when she returned with bruises, how she'd taken what she could and left in the night. "I never told anyone," she said, "but I knew he'd follow eventually. Men like him don't like to be left behind." Rhea's jaw clenched. "If he finds this place, he'll burn it." The wind outside shifted. The silence inside deepened. Then Rhea said, "We should leave tonight." Alma blinked. "Where would we go?" "North. Follow the creek bed. Find cover in the pines. Melt. We'll make travel easier soon. Maybe we make it to the outpost near the mountain pass." "That's days with a newborn. The dome won't last much longer. Heat's melting the base. Rot's setting in. We can't stay through another storm." Alma looked around the shelter. The walls that had once been golden and smooth were now pocked and streaked. Dampness clung to the hay. The ceiling dripped in places, but it was still hers, the only shelter she'd built with her own hands, the place her son had been born, the place that had saved her life. She didn't want to abandon it. "Maybe he doesn't know we're here," she said. Rhea said nothing. That night, Alma lay awake beside her baby, listening. Rhea took first watch. The wind was still, but her heart wasn't. Every crunch of snow outside sounded like boots, every creak of hay a warning. At some point, she drifted into a half-sleep, and in that half-sleep she dreamed of fire. Not the safe kind, not the kind that warms or cooks or comforts, but fire that devours, that shrieks, that eats through hay and wood and cloth alike, turning the dome into a funeral pyre. She woke gasping. Rhea was already crouched at the vent, staring. Alma whispered, "What is it?" "Same rider," she said. "He's back. And closer." Alma pushed herself up. "He knows. Maybe, or maybe he's just circling." "I can't risk it." "Not with him." Rhea looked back, eyes hard. "Then we fight." The decision was made in silence. By first light, they began reinforcing the tunnel, not with hay, but with hard-packed snow and a dead branch they stripped of bark. It wouldn't hold forever, but it might hold long enough. Alma fed the baby, wrapped him tight, and placed him in a woven basket she'd stitched from bale twine. It felt like betrayal, putting him down, but she needed her hands. Rhea buried the stove's fire, sealing it beneath wet snow and hay ash to keep the scent down. Then they waited. And just before sundown, the man came. He didn't announce himself. He just rode up, slow and deliberate, like he owned the land and was only here to confirm it. His horse snorted, stopped 10 feet from the dome. Alma could hear the creak of saddle leather through the hay wall. Then, "I see you in there." Alma's breath caught. "You gonna come out, Alma?" His voice hadn't changed. Still smooth, still sweet in the most sickening way. It dripped off the snow like sap, thick and poisonous. "I come a long way for you." Silence. "I've been tracking you since Missouri, through ice, through godless country, through wolves and worse." More silence. "You think this thing you built, this nest, keeps you safe?" He dismounted. Rhea clicked the hammer on the rifle. Alma whispered, "Wait." They heard him circle the dome once. Boots crunching, snow shifting, a hand brushing hay, then sudden force, a kick to the side of the dome. Hay tumbled, then another. "You think this is a house?" he spat. "It's a pile of weeds. It'll burn faster than paper." Rhea raised the rifle, but Alma reached out. "Not yet. Come out now," Morgan said. "Bring the boy." Alma's eyes filled with tears. She stepped toward the tunnel. Rhea grabbed her arm. "No. I need him to come closer." Outside, Morgan lit something. A torch. The smell of kerosene hit the air. "I'll burn you out. You know I will," Alma whispered. "Now." Rhea moved to the vent. She lined the shot, but Morgan was ready. He dove to the side as the bullet cracked the air, missed by inches. He howled and threw the torch. It hit the dome. Outer hay caught fire immediately. The top blazed. Inside, smoke curled fast. The baby wailed. Alma didn't hesitate. She grabbed the basket, shielded the baby with her body, and screamed, "Out the back!" Rhea kicked through the tunnel they'd been digging for days, the emergency exit through the base of the dome. Snow gave way. They crawled fast, heat blistering their backs. They emerged into the snowfield behind the ridge, gasping. The dome was ablaze, orange light against white snow. Morgan stood silhouetted by flame, and then Alma stood up, baby in arms. He saw her for the first time in months, and he smiled, but before he could take a step, Rhea was behind him, quiet as a ghost, rifle raised. "Don't," she said. He turned. "This your new man?" he sneered. "Dressed awful strange for a—" Rhea pulled the trigger. He dropped before he finished the sentence. The flames rose higher. Alma didn't speak. She just watched the dome collapse. Her shelter, her womb, her grave, her miracle, all gone, but she was still alive. Her baby was alive, and the man who'd haunted her was not. Rhea came to her side. "We should go," she said. Alma nodded. She didn't look back. The first river they tried to cross swallowed the sled whole. They'd lashed together what they could. Scraps of the old sled, Morgan's horse stripped of its saddle and gear, salvaged iron from the stove, canvas to keep the baby dry, and started north along the old creek bed just before dawn. The snows had begun to melt in patches, revealing dark, spongy earth and glinting water, the beginnings of spring fighting through the frost. But the water moved faster than they thought. A week ago it had been nothing but ice. Now it surged like a thing alive. Alma had her son swaddled against her chest, his head barely peeking out of the wool wraps they'd stitched from the burnt remains of the hay dome's lining. His cheeks were red from cold, his nose always running. She'd been nursing him as much as she could, despite her body aching from the endless walking, but some days her milk barely came. The wild teas helped, but not enough. Rhea hunted when she could, small rabbits mostly, and they'd fashioned a sling to carry what meat they found without slowing their pace. But that day, the water betrayed them. They'd made it halfway across the stream, which had swollen wider with every hour, when the horse stumbled, panicked, and bolted sideways. The sled twisted, caught on a submerged log, and flipped. Their supplies tumbled into the river. Alma screamed. Rhea dove after the packs. The baby, thank God, was strapped to Alma's chest. She turned away from the water, shielding him, falling to her knees on the bank while the water licked at her calves and threatened to take her with it. By the time Rhea dragged the last bundle from the current, the sky had darkened, not with storm, but with dusk, cold dusk, the kind that kills faster than it promises warmth. They made camp in a hollow near a fallen pine, shivering and cursing, trying to dry their clothes by a weak fire made with damp twigs and barely burning bark. Alma's hands shook so bad she couldn't hold a spoon. Her baby whimpered in his sleep. Rhea sat beside her, arms crossed tight, staring into the embers. "We've got 2 days, maybe 3, until we reach the outpost, if we push hard." "What if there's nothing there?" Alma whispered. "There will be. And if it's just more men like Morgan?" "Then we burn it too," Rhea said, voice low, but even she didn't believe that. They crossed through 2 ridges and a frozen meadow the next day. The baby pressed to Alma's chest, his face chapped raw by wind. Rhea scouted ahead, eyes sharp for movement. There were tracks in the slush, not human, elk mostly. Once a wolf. They didn't speak much. Words took energy and trust, but Alma noticed Rhea checking her more often, looking at the way she limped, the dark under her eyes, the way her fingers trembled even when the fire was high. "You're burning up," Rhea said that night. "I'm just tired." "You've got fever. It'll pass." But it didn't. By the next day, Alma was swaying on her feet. She couldn't nurse. Her lips cracked so badly she bled when she tried to speak. Rhea had to carry the baby in her own coat while Alma leaned on a stick just to stay upright. They camped near a creek under an old cedar. Rhea dug a hollow, lined it with bark, and built a lean-to from fallen branches. She made a broth from squirrel meat and pine. Alma drank it but kept shivering. The baby wouldn't stop crying. That night, Alma whispered, "If I don't wake up—" "You will," Rhea said. "If I don't, take him." "No, you have to." "No, he'll die." Rhea sat beside her, staring into the dark. Then softer. "You built a shelter out of hay and blood. You crossed snowfields with no map. You fought off a man who hunted you like a dog. You've got a fire under your skin, Alma. Don't you dare let it go cold now." Alma cried then, not because of the fever, but because someone finally believed she could live. The fever broke 2 nights later. She woke wet with sweat, weak as a leaf, but her skin no longer burned. The baby had curled beside her, sleeping, his tiny breaths steady. Rhea handed her a cup of cold tea. "We're close," she said. "Another day, maybe less." Alma sat up slowly. "How do you know?" "Trail markers, broken stone, old army route. I know the signs." "You've been here before?" "Long ago." They moved slower, but with purpose. The wind was shifting, no longer sharp with snow, but damp with thaw. Birds returned. The ground grew soft beneath their boots. And finally, in the middle of a long, empty valley, they saw smoke, not from fire, from chimneys. The outpost was small, just 5 cabins and a trading post with a broken sign swinging from rusted chains. No guards, no gates, no welcome, but no threats either. Rhea led the way. Alma followed, baby bundled against her chest, too tired to feel relief. They approached the nearest cabin. A man stepped out, beard to his chest, one eye gone, the other squinting like it hadn't seen strangers in months. He didn't raise a rifle. He just said, "You lost?" Rhea answered, "No." The man looked them over. The baby, the packs, the boots, the dried blood on Alma's sleeves. "Looks like you've come far." "We have," he nodded, stepped aside. "We've got stew and heat." Alma didn't cry until the warmth hit her bones. They stayed 3 weeks. The baby gained weight. Alma could walk without help. Rhea found work mending traps and skins. They didn't talk much about what had happened. Not the dome, not Morgan, not the road that led them here. But Alma started writing, a logbook, just for herself. She wrote about the Hay Dome, day by day, how she'd built it, what worked, what didn't. She drew diagrams. She wrote about the fire vent, the insulation, the risks, the blessings, about the birth, the blood, the wind. She called it a shelter made of straw. Rhea read it in pieces, sometimes smiling, sometimes scowling. "You're not going to send that to a paper, are you?" Alma shrugged. "Maybe. They won't believe it. Doesn't matter." Rhea didn't argue. Instead, she carved Alma a small wooden figure, a baby, wrapped in a coat, smiling. Alma kept it in her satchel. One night, Rhea asked, "What now?" "I don't know," Alma said. "You staying here?" "For now." "Just for now?" Alma looked at her child. "We didn't survive all that to die standing still." Rhea raised an eyebrow. "You thinking of building again?" Alma nodded. "Another hay dome?" "No," she said, eyes shining. "Something better." The sun had risen high enough to melt the frost from the cabin roofs when Alma stepped out into the soft, thawing dirt. Boots still patched with old blood, but now lined with clean wool. Her baby was strapped to her chest again, heavier now, quieter too, his belly full, and his face pink with life. She squinted at the open sky, not grey, not the bone-white pall of snow clouds, but blue, real blue, the color of things growing back. It had been a full month since the dome burned, a full month since Morgan's torch sent her miracle shelter into smoke and ash, since she and Rhea crawled through the snow, half-starved and half-dead, to a town made of strangers and second chances. And now the wild was stirring again. Tracks cut across the fields in wet, crumbling lines. Deer, raccoon, elk, if the hoofprints were right. Birds had returned to the spruce branches overhead. Bees had begun searching half-melted logs. And in the far distance, across the sloping valley, lay the next decision: stay in this half-forgotten outpost or build again. She watched the baby breathe. His nose twitched in the sunlight. His lips puckered in dreams. Then she heard the boots, not hurried, not heavy, just the familiar pace of someone who didn't feel the need to make noise. "You're up early," Rhea said, stepping beside her. She was already dressed for travel, coat slung across her shoulder, rifle strapped over her back, eyes sharp and scanning the horizon the way wolves watch for movement. "I never sleep too long these days," Alma answered. "I know the feeling." They stood in silence, watching the trail fade into the thawing trees. Then Alma said, "I want to build." Rhea didn't answer, just waited. "But not here," Alma continued. "This outpost, it's safe for now. But it's too close to the old trails. If Morgan came this far, others will too. There's nothing to stop worse men from coming. I figured you were thinking it. I want to go farther, find high ground, south-facing, with water nearby, shelter from the wind, trees for lumber, rocks for heat sink, and hay." Alma smiled, just barely. "No more hay, but I've got other ideas." Rhea nodded slowly. "You don't need my permission. I need your help." That made her pause, really pause. Rhea, who rarely asked questions or offered emotion, blinked like Alma had surprised her. "You're asking me to stay?" "I'm asking if you want to build something too." Rhea's eyes didn't soften, but her breath did. A long exhale. She looked down at the baby, then out toward the trees again. "Tell me your plan." They left the outpost at dawn 3 days later, heading northeast this time, following a ridgeline Rhea said once connected to an abandoned trading path. Alma had traded one of their spare rifles for a rusted hatchet and a small saw. A family of trappers had gifted them extra nails and a bundle of jerky. No one stopped them. The land grew wilder with each mile. No stumps, no fence posts, no trash left by settlers, just clean woods and the fresh smell of meltwater running downhill. By midday, they found it. The bluff was wide and rounded like the back of a sleeping bear, facing south over a shallow gorge where a spring trickled between stones. Pines lined the far side, tall enough to fell if needed. A narrow bend, In the bluff curved into the hillside, forming a natural break from wind. And best of all, a thick sheet of rock ran just beneath the surface. Perfect for foundation. Alma stood there, holding her baby close, and felt the air move through her ribs like breath returned. "This is it," she whispered. Rhea was already walking the perimeter, testing the slope, measuring the sun's arc with her hand. "Foundation here," she said, pointing. "High enough to stay dry and thaw." "We build in a circle," Alma said. "Like the dome, but wood this time. Double wall, straw or moss insulation between. Sloped roof, stone-lined hearth. You planning to draw it again?" "I already have." That night, they set camp beside a boulder, lit a fire small enough not to show, and shared plans by lamplight. Alma opened her notebook, the one she'd filled with pages of the Hay Dome, her journey, what worked and what failed. "I'm going to teach other women how to do this," she said. "They won't listen, not at first, but if we show them—" "If you show them," Rhea corrected, "they'll believe. You want to start a colony?" "No. I want to make it easier for women to survive." Rhea said nothing for a while. Then, "You'll need more than drawings." "I'll have proof, my boy." "You really think that's enough?" Alma looked into the fire. "It was enough for me." The build began the next morning. Rhea felled the first tree, a straight pine with bark thick as armor. She showed Alma how to notch and guide the fall. Alma learned fast, though her muscles still ached from childbirth and cold. They worked in short shifts, taking turns holding the baby while the other cut or hauled. They started with the foundation, stones cleared from the creek, set in a circle, packed with dirt and sealed with clay. By the end of the first week, the footprint was clear. A ring 10 feet wide, insulated with branches and early moss, ready for walls. Alma worked harder than she had in her life, not because it came easy, but because she'd already survived worse. Each log they hauled reminded her of the Hay Dome, how it had started as madness, a last resort, a cry in the dark. But this time wasn't desperation, it was intention. By the second week, the walls reached waist height. The child had learned to smile. Rhea hunted less. They ate better. Alma wrote every night. She wrote not just what they did, but why. How heat moved through earth. How stone stored warmth. How fire smoke vented better through angled ducts. How insulation didn't have to mean money, just knowledge. How women like her, with nothing but a baby and a handful of bales, could survive winter if they had the right ideas. Sometimes Rhea read over her shoulder, sometimes she didn't. But every morning they kept building. The first visitor came in the third month. A woman young, maybe 20, skin tanned, dress torn. She came out of the trees like a ghost, carrying a bundle of clothes and eyes like she hadn't slept in days. She said her name was Elsie. Her husband had vanished after heading west with a claim marker. She'd walked nearly 50 miles, following word of 2 women building something out here. Rhea offered her a drink. Alma offered her a seat. By summer, there were 6 of them. 3 women, 1 boy, 1 child still in the womb, and a man who spoke only when asked. They built 3 shelters that season, none as warm as the dome had been, but all better than nothing. Stone bases, wood walls, insulated attics with chimney vents, each one anchored into the ridge facing south, strong against the wind. And at the center of it all, Alma's cabin. She painted the baby's name, Thomas, into the hearthstone with berry juice and ash. Visitors started calling the place the Round, for how the homes all faced inward, for how the women stood together. Alma never corrected them. In the 3rd year, a snowstorm swept through the ridge, colder than any since that first one. Ice slammed the bluff for 9 days. Trees fell. A chimney cracked. No one died. When the storm passed, they dug out the vents, repaired the damage, and built more. A letter arrived the next summer, brought by a trader on his last run through the pass. It had no name on the envelope, just one sentence written in slanted ink. "I read about a woman who survived the winter in a Hay-Igloo. I have 3 daughters. Where do we go?" Alma wrote back with a map. In time, the cabins multiplied. The circle widened. The stories spread. Some said the woman had lived in a snowdrift like a fox. Others said she'd built a home from nothing but straw and teeth. Some whispered she'd killed a man with fire, or had been rescued by a ghost, or that her child had never cried once his whole life. None of it was true, but all of it was real. Because she had survived, because she had built, because they'd said a woman alone wouldn't survive the winter. And now, years later, her boy laughed in the sunlight while other children gathered wood, and other mothers stacked stone, and strangers came from across the mountains to learn how to keep their children warm in the cold. And at the edge of the ridge, under a hand-carved sign that read, "The Round," Alma kept her promise. She taught them how to build with what they had. She taught them how to shelter life. She taught them what no man had ever thought to ask. And when new snow fell, they no longer feared it, because the woman who had once birthed a child in a Hay-Igloo now showed others how to do more than survive. She showed them how to thrive.